Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Brookline.News. I'm Sam Mintz. I'm the editor of Brookline.News. If you're going to clap every line, I'll take it. Before we get to the incredible stories from our 6 storytellers tonight, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our story. It's been almost exactly 1 year since we started this online news outlet, hoping to fill a void left behind by the hollowing out of local newspapers that had left Brookline, of all places, a news desert. So we launched last year. We've grown a lot since then in ways we're very excited and proud about. We have over 6,000 online subscribers. We've published hundreds of stories on every topic imaginable. We've hired a growing team to help me out producing our news every week. And we've really gotten a start on training the next generation of journalists in the Boston area, which is another big part of our mission. For me personally, having grown up in the Boston area, it's really been a thrill to have this job and come into this community and be told, hey, your job now is to learn about Brookline, to try to understand it and try to explain it and translate it for people who want to know what's happening both here and in the broader Boston area. I've really enjoyed getting to know the physical corners of Brookline, the parks and the schools and the streets, the stores, the sort of psychological and intellectual corners of Brookline, the political structures like the people behind the scenes at Town Hall who make this town tick, the strange, unique town meeting, which is our form of government here in Brookline, which apparently many of you are familiar with. But most of all, it's been really a thrill to meet people like you, the interesting people of Brookline. A couple of examples that come to mind are the 19-year-old woman who we profiled who is going to the Olympics in sport pistol, of all things, who practiced shooting an air pistol in her parents' Brookline apartment growing up. Or it's the business owners I've spoken to who are worried about how their businesses and livelihoods will survive through COVID and the sort of end of the pandemic. Or the Brookline family who had a room in their house, so they saw that a family of Haitian migrants were sleeping in Boston Logan Airport, as hundreds of families were, and decided to take them in and open up their home to them. So, we're a startup. There have been plenty of highs and lows. It's been really exciting to have the chance to start something new, something that can have an impact in an industry where that often the opposite is the case these days. But there's also a lot of uncertainty that comes with that. Will we be able to sustain ourselves, grow into the full-blown news organization that this town really, really needs and deserves? I definitely have nights, sitting, staring at my computer screen in the 6th hour of a select board meeting. It's midnight, and I'm wondering, what are we doing here? What am I doing here? But what keeps me going and really helps me fully understand the importance of what we're doing has been the feedback and engagement that I've gotten from the community, from people like you, which I'd say has really poured in since we started a year ago. One recent example that really sticks out for me is a reader who emailed and said that in the 45 years that he's lived in Brookline, reading our stuff had made him feel the most in touch ever to the town, and that really stuck with me. So overall, what I've learned about Brookline is that it's a place that wants to be engaged with the world and with itself. It's a town that loves news and that loves a good story. So let's get to the storytelling. I want to introduce our host for the evening, Meghna Chakrabarti. Meghna is an award-winning journalist. She's the host of the acclaimed NPR program On Point. She's recognized on the national stage as one of the country's most thoughtful and accomplished interviewers. But we like to think of her as a Brookline mom and an engaged Brookline citizen who really cares deeply about her community. So Meghna, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. You have more energy than that. Come on. Hello! Sam's exactly right. My actual title is Brookline Mom. Lawrence Mom, more specifically, if you really want to know. And before I start with tonight's fantastic program, I just want to reiterate what Sam said. There's no one other than a local journalist who will sit through the 6th hour of a select board meeting. So that is the person who's there for you, right? And I say this a lot at WBUR. I am not here to fundraise for WBUR tonight, believe it or not. I am here to ask you to support local news at Brookline.News, because it is true that, my fundamental belief is that our democracy, right, American democracy writ large, begins with the small d, demos, which begins here, right, in our own communities. And the people who are the chroniclers of what's happening in our community deserve our support, because it provides the lifeblood of knowledge and information to have us all be better citizens of our town. So whatever you can do, and you're here as part of your support, but continuing support for Brookline News will go a long way. So thank you for that. Now, I was thinking about how to introduce the kinds of stories that you're going to hear tonight, and I thought maybe one way of doing it, if you'll forgive me, is to go back in time to my own history with this very unique town. And I would say I drop a pin in my timeline at one particular moment. And that is a day that my husband comes running back to our condo, running from CVS, okay? Those CVS literally next door to here. By the way, the Coolidge looks beautiful and amazing. Thank you, Coolidge. So this was maybe like 15 years ago, right? And he's running back home. He bursts through the door. He's holding this bag and he says, "I got it, I got it." He's British, so it was more like, "I've got it, I've got it." And out of the bag, out of the CVS bag, he pulls this. Some of you may know what this is, but it is a truly collector's item. Do you see this? Can you see this? It is a t-shirt. Well, I guess it's a long sleeve shirt. And it says, this still makes me laugh, "Brookline, Massachusetts, my kind of town." Okay? No, this is real. Somewhere in the CVS next door, between the Depends and the toenail fungus creams and the cheap Halloween candy, there was a rack of shirts that said, "Brookline, my kind of town," okay? And so my husband and I, we were like, "Oh my God, we have to have this. We have to have this." This was 15 years ago, and to us it wasn't like, "Oh, what a marker of pride," right? That we were roughly newly arrived in Brookline. We love this place. We wanted to show our pride for the town. No. It was like something completely different. We considered this the apotheosis of late-stage capitalism, right? Because it was in a corporate pharmacy. The shirt's made in Haiti, right? I don't know where it was printed, and it was probably like $9 at the time. So this like soulless confluence of everything about American capitalism that I both kind of appreciate and kind of don't, right here in this t-shirt. So we bought it. And be proud of us, we still have it. It's been 15 years we have this t-shirt. And the reason why I just cracked this up, we're like, this is satire. This is perfect satire. And yeah, that was back when we had extra time to laugh about t-shirts that might have been satire. And the reason why it was so funny to us is I actually ended up in Brookline by accident. I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest. Part of my heart will always remain there. Yay, whoever that is, woo! And my original plan was to move to the Boston area for 2 years tops, to go to graduate school for my master's degree. And then hightail it back to the Northwest, to the big trees and the glorious mountains, and put my time on the East Coast behind me. And it just so happened that Brookline was literally geographically located right between the two places I needed to spend most of my time, which was down in Longwood, the Harvard School of Public Health, and then up at Harvard's Cambridge campus for some of the other classes related to my master's degree. So it was really like as close to like throwing a dart to between two places as you can get. And it landed in Brookline. So all I knew about the town was that it was super convenient and it was bloody expensive in comparison to where I grew up. So 1 year turns into 2. It's okay, that's my master's degree program, 2 years. 2 becomes 3. 3 becomes, oh, I got a job here. and not at all in anything that I studied. Funny how that happens. That job then got paired up with a marriage, and then thereafter, you know where this is going, right? We procreate. And have 2 really beautiful, luminous children. And that was the point where, you know, the 2 years and the 3 years and the 4 years suddenly bring things like frequent trips to Hall's Pond to see if we can find the herons that land there and hang out. Bike rides along the muddy river, which were great sometimes, not so great others, depending on how much trash was around. 8 a.m., sometimes 8:05, sometimes 8:07 drop-offs at school. I have some fellow Lawrence moms who know exactly what I'm talking about. Walking, and walking, right? Because everything that's important to my life is basically within a quarter mile of here. My home, Trader Joe's, my workplace, school, the bookstore, everything. Being so in love with Coolidge Corner that when it finally came time for me, my husband, our 2 kids, and our giant dog to move out of our 1-bedroom on Winchester Street, I told our local realtor, I said, yeah, sure, we'll look in different neighborhoods as long as it's within a half a mile of the intersection of Beacon and Winchester Street. So the point is for me, the 2-year plan has now turned into 24. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about this town. But it's what it's become. It's become home. All its quirks, all its idiosyncrasies, its problems, its passions, all the massive intelligence that's just walking around the streets here. And let's admit it, it's a very passionate habit of self-admiration as a town as well. I love it all. I love it all. This place, this thing, this entity called Brookline, its people. I don't know how, but Brookline has become my kind of town, okay? So the story here is what was once satire is now sincerity. And I used to wear it at home because I didn't actually really care for the shirt, but now I can proudly wear it, right? Should probably wear it around town. How does it look? Is that good? I know everyone's thinking, God, I never thought she'd get so much mileage out of a CVS t-shirt. But late stage capitalism and cynicism be damned. I am honored to live here and honored to live with all of you in this unique place. And what I firmly believe tonight you'll hear are stories from your neighbors. You may not know them personally, but there'll be a kernel in each of these stories that really resonates profoundly within you. It will really touch you in a way that's unique because you'll recognize it. Again, I don't know what that thing is, but there's something that binds us all together by virtue of living where we do. And so it is my honor to get us started on this journey of storytelling tonight. And let me begin with Miranda Daniloff. She is the proud Brookline mom of a recent college grad and a heretically named chocolate lab called Jeter. Someone was gonna boo. I knew someone was gonna do that. For those of you who shockingly aren't baseball fans, as in that's Jeter as in the Yankees star, we asked all of our storytellers to share an unexpected place that we might find them in Brookline. And Miranda says that place is the Washington Street Firehouse, where she frequently visits with her pup. So welcome Miranda to the stage.
All right. So it is September 1986, and I am 23. And I'm at a TV station in Chicago waiting to be interviewed for the 10 o'clock news. The producer hands me some wire copy that says that my father has been formally charged by the Russians as a spy. What had happened was 10 days earlier, my father, Nicholas Daniloff, who was the bureau chief, the Moscow bureau chief for US News and World Report, goes out to meet a friend who hands him a package. A white van pulls up. KGB thugs jump out, they handcuff him, they throw him in the back, and they send him speed off to prison. The Americans had arrested a Soviet spy in the New York subway, caught red-handed, and the Russians wanted a hostage to get their guy back. The producer hands me a glass of water because I have to sit down, because the wire copy also says that the penalty for espionage in the Soviet Union is 30 years hard labor or death. I'm a recent theater major living in Chicago. I'm doing the audition circuit. I have an agent, some super snazzy headshots, and a waitress job at a jazz club that closes at 4 a.m. I had just gone to go visit my parents in Moscow, and I was on my way back home through Paris when I learned of my father's arrest. There were about 15 messages for me at the hotel. I try to call my mother, but of course the KGB has jammed the phone lines. The following day, I think to myself, okay, I've got to get myself to the American embassy to figure out what to do next. But it's Labor Day, it's a holiday, and it's closed. And I remember this sinking, panicky feeling as I'm banging on the door, trying to get a duty officer through the intercom, and when I finally do, nobody knows a thing. Finally, I get a message to fly to London to meet up with my 16-year-old brother, whom my mother was sending on an airplane out of Moscow. And when I get there, we meet up in Heathrow Airport, the magazine's publisher greets us with a whole bunch of reporters trailing behind him. The next thing I know, I've got microphones shoved in my face, and all of a sudden we're doing an impromptu press conference at the baggage claim. This is still the Cold War. And the strategy here was to try to get as much media attention as we possibly could to force some kind of resolution. So my uncle gets us booked on the BBC TV. It's a live interview in front of hundreds of millions of people around the globe. I remember hearing the interview question, and my heart is pounding and my mouth is dry, and I'm thinking, you better not say the wrong thing, or they're going to be sending your father off to the gulag. Even though this was still the Cold War, and there was no Twitter, no Instagram, no social media, this thing just took off like wildfire. It just took off. There were restaurants across the country that started boycotting Russian vodka. The US-Soviet summit between President Reagan and President Gorbachev canceled. News helicopters landed on the football field of my brother's high school. This was my dad. I mean, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders when I was little, who used to pretend to be the Chiquita banana lady so I would laugh. And now, all of a sudden, he's caught up in some John le Carré-like spy novel, only this isn't fiction. I don't have time to think or feel or breathe. When I get back to Chicago, my roommate has filled up reams of yellow pads with interview requests from Good Morning America, from reporters wanting interviews, from the Today Show. I get flown out to New York and Boston for news appearances. I walk past a newspaper box and I see a front page of the newspaper with a woman that looks vaguely familiar, and it's me. And then there are these other requests. A football player from the Chicago Bears wants a date. Fashion photographers promise me free photo sessions and modeling contracts. There's some crazy person in Chicago who is cutting up the coupons from the Sunday paper and mailing them to me. And then I've got a peeping Tom at my back window. I mean, I don't get it. People see you on TV and they think that they can just do these kinds of things. So I'd go to my waitress job, I'd pull my hair back into a ponytail and wear garish blue eyeshadow and hope that nobody would recognize me. Finally, after about a month of this, the US and Russia strike a deal. I had just moved into a new apartment, and my landlord was upgrading the kitchen appliances. The phone starts ringing at 6 a.m., and it's CBS Evening News. The producer says, "Your father is being released today, and Dan rather wants you to come into the studio for an interview." And I say, "Well, I'd love to, but I can't. I'm waiting for my stove." Finally, I get confirmation that he's on a flight to Berlin and then on to Washington, D.C. The producer calls back, "Now we're sending a car and an intern to wait for your stove." I fly to Washington, D.C. to meet up with my mother, my father, and my brother. We have 10 minutes in a holding room at Dulles Airport for tears and hugs and, oh my God, the relief. And then my father goes off to talk to 150 reporters. My mother and I spend the next few days answering phone calls, making appointments. The wife of a friend of ours comes to take me clothes shopping for our visit to the White House. She picks out red shoes and a red belt, things that I would never have picked for myself. Then a car takes us to the White House, and we're greeted very warmly at the Oval Office by President Reagan, who's very, very tall, and Nancy Reagan, who's really tiny, and she has a huge head. My father and the president sit in those chairs in front of the fireplace, have a little chat. Photographers are taking photographs, lots of photographs, then more photographs out on the Rose Garden steps. When I finally get back to Chicago, life begins to revert to something that somewhat resembles normal. I do a very, very small acting role for a TV drama with Shelley Hack, who was one of the Charlie's Angels in that hit show, Charlie's Angels. And we're out by the Chicago River outside, and some bystander comes up and says, "Oh my God, oh my God." Of course, I move aside for Shelley Hack. "You're the Daniloff daughter," and she points at me. After a number of years, I begin to think that the only way to have any kind of agency in a theater career, to be able to pay your bills or to actually have any control over what you do, is to be famous. And I'd had a taste of that, and I didn't love it. So I do one last audition at the Steppenwolf Theater for a role that I don't get, and I decide that I am done. I mean, who wants to live one's life in make-believe anyway? Of course, at the time, I didn't realize what else I was going to be giving up. So I move into radio journalism, covering real life, move to Boston, get married, acquire stepchildren, have a baby, and become a Runkle School parent. One summer evening, I'm sitting at a bar on Cape Cod with my husband, who's made friends with a retired attorney. He's involved in the local theater scene. "Oh, really?" I say. "Well, I did theater in Chicago 30 years ago." He asks me if I'd audition for the play that he's doing that spring. He asks for 7 months, and I keep saying no. Long time ago, far away. He keeps asking. I keep saying no. One night, he comes in and slaps a script down on the bar and says, "Just read the damn play." So I do. The play is called A Pack of Lies. and it's set in the Cold War. And it's about two couples who are friends. Only one of the couples is spying for the Russians. Right? I mean, of all of the plays. So I audition. And I think I also sort of wanted to know whether I could still do it. And I get the part of the woman, not the spy woman, but the woman who's betrayed. And oh my God, I was so happy to work with these actors. They were so talented. And you could feel every night the audience just breathing with you. And the process of creating that character and bringing her story to life was so deliciously familiar. And something in me begins to stir. It wasn't that I thought that I was going to step back into a theater career. No, that's not what it was. What it was reaching back into my own creativity, that creative voice, that voice that I had put away, that, like I had almost wrapped it up in tissue paper and put it into a box for safekeeping. Because at the age of 23, I didn't know how to tell the difference between the creative voice and the voice that got swept up in international politics. And I certainly didn't know what to do with that fear that I might say the wrong thing in a situation that had life or death consequences. So if I could tell my 23-year-old self something, this is what I would say. Theater, the arts, music, painting, yeah, it's all make-believe. But it's also the art of telling the truth, emotional truths, of the things that connect us, the things that bind us and divide us, but mostly about what makes all of us human. And there's incredible value to that. Sometimes I think that life has this funny way of making you come full circle so that you can look at life again from a completely different perspective. And sometimes, if you're brave enough, you can pick up where you began.
Everyone give Miranda another round of applause. That was fantastic. What a start, huh? I loved how you described about the art of telling emotional truths. So spot on. Just a beautifully told story. And have you written a book about your experience yet? No? Well, I'm waiting to read it when it gets published. So our next storyteller represents Brookline's next generation of storytellers. Pablo Tejedor Meyers is a Brookline High senior. Woo! Yeah! That's not only for BHS, that's also for Pablo, graduating this year. He's a passionate runner, and to his peers at school, he's known as the Colombian Shirt Kid. A self-taught musician, you can find Pablo at the Monmouth Street Church on Saturday mornings playing violin. Welcome, Pablo, to the stage.
What's up, people? How's it going? Thanks for the intro. I just got a new shirt, guys. Check it out. See, I'll give you some context. My mom is from Colombia. And so as I entered my Brookline High experience, my career, I decided to join a club. Let's get out there. And so as I was selecting my club of choice, there were many to choose from. I ended up going with the Brookline High Latinx Club. I remember walking in that day and immediately getting hit by a wave of community, just an overwhelming feeling. There were people from all different backgrounds, speaking different sounding Spanish, which was so cool to me. I only really heard my Colombian Spanish. And there was food being made in the back of the room off a little griddle. It was really good. And of course, the highlight of the day, which we spent the rest of the day doing, there was some great music that just made me want to dance. And so, of course, with that energy in that room, I became a regular. Fast forward a year, I'm walking back in to the club, a familiar face, and there's a teacher in the group. She's new, I don't really know her. And she addresses the group asking for a volunteer to speak at this day at the high school called the Day of Racial Reform and Solidarity. It's an annual event at BHS where students and teachers get up on stage much like this and talk about their experiences, their life stories having to do with their racial identities. And so the teacher asked, she threw out the question, who's gonna do it, guys? And immediately people were ducking and dodging eyes, afraid to look up at the teacher, thinking they might be the random tribute selected. And after a few long seconds of silence, I felt some eyes settle on me. Uh-oh. And then to break the silence, someone from the back of the room said, "Hey, Pablo, what if you did the speech?" Oh no. And that wasn't particularly out of character. I was never really one to back down from winging a presentation, a slideshow or something, or raising my hand up in class. That was never an issue for me, but the issue for me was in those few seconds where I didn't raise my hand. I was thinking of what on earth I would talk about if I did do this. Could I do this? So I took my second to think about it, looked around a little nervously, and I said, you know what, sure, I trust myself, I'll go for it. And so I responded with a very confident, sure, sign me up. And so I was added to the list. Sorry. I was added to the list. And so as I was, thinking about what to write that rest of the block, I kind of got lost track of time, went to my next class, and I went on with my life. And so that first week when people are supposed to start preparing for the speech, I forgot that I had signed myself up. And so I come back the next week, and one of the club facilitators, Mr. Mendez, so excited, he came up to me, he jogged up, like literally jogged up, and was up and said, "Pablito, ¿cómo va? ¿Cómo va el speech? Like, tell me ideas, man." And I stared back at him with a blank face. So that night, the pressure really started to set in. The weight of this speech started to push aside my other duties, my other responsibilities, and over dinner, I opened it up to the family. I had to. I was drawing blanks. I said, what could I write about? How could I cover my whole identity as a Latino person in just a 3-minute speech? I was going in circles. I was lost. For the younger folks in the crowd, you might have seen this. For the older folks in the crowd, on TikTok, teenagers who are typically fed up with their parents will get up online, post a little video, and one example that I found quite relatable was some kid, made a short little video with a dance saying, it's gonna be a long day of doing chores when you wake up on a Saturday morning to the sound of a vacuum cleaner. Oh, the worst. And in my life, I had a very similar experience, but typically the vacuum cleaner was drowned out by the sound of some Bad Bunny or Celia Cruz or some salsa merengue. And I'd roll out of bed all angry that I got woken up, and I'd head downstairs to the kitchen, and I'd walk in, and bam, immediately swept off my feet into a circle with my grandma's hands and my feet on her feet. And I would learn how to dance. And these mornings were when I was most immersed in my Colombian culture. These mornings are when I learned to cook arepas, make pollo encebollado, and of course, when I learned how to speak Spanish. And speaking Spanish has been a gift. In fact, so for some further context, my grandparents, who grew up in Colombia, then moved to Spain, and then moved to Boston to be around my sister and I, and the rest of the family, really. They didn't really have much English by the time they got here. And so very enthusiastically, we signed them up for some classes in hopes that they would, be able to maybe get fluent. We'll see. And actually, my grandma got very politely asked to leave her English class. She was too busy trying to teach everyone else Spanish, because who needs to learn English when you could have everyone else speak Spanish? It's easier to chit-chat. So with the grandparents, we spoke Spanish. And speaking Spanish has gone so far for me at school, especially in the club, with students who arrive from their respective countries, Latin American, Spanish-speaking countries. It's amazing to be able to establish a connection with them. At work, I worked a few summers at Landry's Bikes. Love it. The day I was hired, a family came in who didn't speak English, and I was wrapping up with my interview, and someone came over and asked, hey, to the manager, Mark, I need some help with this Spanish-speaking this Spanish-speaking family, and I was summoned. And that's how I ended up actually selling my first bike at Landry's. Thank you. And so Spanish speaking, of course, has also come a long way when I visit my family in Colombia. I remember my first time going to Colombia. We walk out of the airport, and along the fence there, the railing, there was 15 or 20 or so relatives with signs and flowers and all ready to go dance and hug and, introduce. And then we get back to their house, and there were more people with more signs and flowers and ready to introduce. Over the course of that trip, we met around 63 people. You can ask my sister, she counted. And all 63 of them were so warm, so welcoming, and so happy to have us. And that feeling, that sensation felt familiar to me, because with my grandmother, my Colombian grandmother, she treated my friends the same way. So warm, so welcoming. She made it clear that our house was my friend's house, and that they could take as much food as they wanted. And it was a lot of food that they took. Without having to speak a word of English, she got that point across. And that feeling has become a big part of who my family is, of who I am. And so when I would come back from Colombia, I would often bring back very good memories, good sounds in my ear, good flavors in my mouth. And I'd come back every time with a shirt just like this. And so when I brought that question to dinner of what on earth am I going to write about, someone said, oh, just write about the shirt. Of course. That shirt that I had, those shirts that I had religiously worn, that I had made synonymous with my name and my age and my introduction, that I had collected and worn even if it was too cold or if it went down past my knees. They became so much a part of my life that they were my life. But I stand today here before you, a changed man. Or a teenager, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm a man yet. My shirts and I have drifted. They've shown up less and less in my regular wardrobe rotation. And I can say that I've begun to separate myself and my identity from just the shirt. In August, I'm heading out to California to start my college life, my college career. Thank you. And I'll be bringing lots of stuff, as much as I can pack in a suitcase. I'll be bringing some arepa harina. I'll be making a new Spotify playlist with those same grooves, make me want to dance. And Mommy, I'll be calling you a lot, wherever you are. But most importantly, as I start this new chapter of my life, I know that it's not what I wear on the outside that matters, because on the inside, I can and always will be the same Columbia shirt kid. Thank you.
Hope you are taking at least one shirt with you, okay? Our next storyteller is no stranger to the world of stories. Michael Maso is the longtime managing director of Boston's Huntington Theatre, where he produced more than 250 plays before retiring last year. The unexpected place you're likely to find Michael, I love this one, Michael, on a counter stool at the Busy Bee restaurant having breakfast. Please welcome Michael to the stage.
Thank you, Meghna. My life in the theater really began over 60 years ago as a small boy in love with the music of Broadway. Even though I was a teenager during the tumultuous 1960s, and as they say, the times they were a-changin', I still knew more about the music of Ethel Merman than I did about Bob Dylan. As a boy, I would take the number 12 bus from the Pelham Parkway section of the Bronx, where I lived, down Fordham Road to a branch of the New York Public Library, where I would check out Broadway cast albums the way other people checked out books. And I would carry as many as I could and get them back, trundle them onto the bus and up the Parkway and into my parents' apartment, where I would play them on the record player all afternoon, singing and dancing and acting them out all by myself. I did this for years. It is possible that by the time I was 20, for a few brief moments, I knew more Broadway musicals by heart than any other straight man in America. Fast forward 20 years, I am now 31 years old, and I walk into the Huntington Theatre for the very first time. It is still called the Boston University Theatre. It is classical, it is elegant, it reminds me of the Broadway theaters of my youth, and I am in love. One of the great privileges of my job is that I get to run over to the theater to see my favorite scenes from my favorite plays as often as I want. And my favorite vantage point is peeking through the curtains so that I could see the actors on stage and the audience reactions at the same time. I loved watching the audience, whether they were hysterical with pleasure because there's a tap dance number in Animal Crackers, the Marx Brothers musical, or rapt with attention and emotion because the great Viola Davis is on stage at the Huntington in August Wilson's 7 Guitars, and she's describing how she saw 4 men in black suits reach into the grave of her lover, Floyd Barton, and lift him up to heaven. I am that same romantic as I am sitting in my office in the summer of 2015, and I get a call from the provost of Boston University. Now, this is a call that I've been expecting with some growing trepidation for many, many months. Because months before, the Huntington had actually offered to buy the theater from BU. We were offering to buy the theater from BU because a couple of years earlier and for the succeeding years, BU had made it very clear that they really didn't want to maintain the facility anymore. And for those of you who have been in the Huntington in 2015, it really needed a lot of work. And so we had mutually agreed that the best thing would be for the Huntington to buy the theater and renovate it on our own. We had spent well over a year negotiating, and I thought that we were this close to a deal. The provost had a different message.
Michael, she said, the university is going to sell the theater, but not to the Huntington. The trustees have decided that given this enormous real estate boom we're in the middle of, we can make a lot more money if we sell the theater on the open market. I was completely blindsided. Even worse, there were no restrictions on the future use of the sale of the theater. And so somebody who bought it could knock down this historic building and build office buildings or condominiums. It suddenly occurred to me that this one transaction could eliminate what my colleagues and I had been working on for over 30 years. What would happen to the tens of thousands of people who came to the theater? What would happen to the hundreds of working artists each year, to the dedicated staff of the Huntington who depended on the theater for their passion and their livelihood? This would be a disaster for the city of Boston. So I found myself a few days later in City Hall conferring with two senior aides to the mayor, Marty Walsh, and they were trying to figure out how we were together going to make this the best outcome that we possibly could. And they were assuring me that they would do whatever they could think of to do, but I really needed to hear it from himself. And so at the end of the meeting, the mayor walked in, and he came and he sat down and he said, if we work together, Michael, I really think we are going to figure this out. So I felt a little better. But after all, there are limits on what even a mayor can do. After all, a mayor can't get in the way or interfere with a private sale between BU and a developer. But what he could do is make it clear to whoever bought the building that the city of Boston and the mayor personally wanted to see a way for the theater to continue. Within a few weeks, I actually found myself at WBUR being interviewed by Meghna Chakrabarti. And Meghna had obviously gotten all the information about the sale that was pending, and she asked a very reasonable question. She said, Michael, where's the Huntington going? And I said, well, we really aren't planning on going anywhere. And she gave me that look. But that look at that moment said, what have you been smoking? But it was radio, and so what she said was, BU says you have to leave. I know. But I really think that there's a better way forward. A way that will get BU and the buyer and the city and all the people the Huntington serves what they need. I had one ace up my sleeve. I knew that Northeastern was very interested in spending a lot of money to buy the theater. After all, the theater was adjacent to their campus, and they would work with the Huntington moving forward. And I thought, well, that's going to be the answer. Because after all, Northeastern, with their clout and their sophistication and their money, no one is going to outbid Northeastern University for this theater. Wrong again. At $25 million, the purchase price of the theater complex was twice what the Huntington had expected to pay, and 20% more than any other developer, including Northeastern. So the winning bidders go to BU to get congratulated, and someone at BU says, oh, by the way, you really need to go down to City Hall and talk to the mayor. And they go down to City Hall, and Marty Walsh says, don't talk to me. What you need to do is go to the Huntington and talk to Michael and his team. So by then, they'd figured out what was going on, and the developers came, and they couldn't have been nicer, and they said, don't worry about this, we've got this. We'll knock down the theater, sure. And then, whatever we build, you'll have a nice little theater that we'll put inside it. And we said, thank you very much, but no. No? We said no, because the public opposition that already exists is going to explode the day you say you're going to knock down the theater. And those folks are going to really slow you down or kill this project, and they'll do it even if we endorse it, but of course we won't. So what we have to do is find a better way to work together on a solution that serves us all. And it was at that moment when I saw their faces that I realized that this could actually work. A few months later, Marty Walsh strode onto the stage of the Huntington. And he said, number one, the deed to the historic theater is going to the Huntington, which has committed to the renovation. Number two, the developers, in exchange for giving us the theater, is going to get to build a 36-story apartment building next door, and when they're done, the Huntington will get 14,000 additional square feet for audience and new performance space. The bottom line, said Marty Walsh, is that the Huntington is staying on Huntington Avenue where it belongs. The crowd applauded. It was a very heady moment. It was emotional. But as the VIPs began to leave the stage, suddenly I heard what the soundboard operator had been playing through the microphones and our loudspeakers. It was a song by a band named Madness. And Madness was singing, "Our house in the middle of our street, our house in the middle of our street." After 34 years, it was finally our house. Thank you.
I remember that interview. It was a tough one because I knew where my heart lied, for sure. But thank you for doing all that you did to save that truly unique resource for everybody in Greater Boston. All right, are we having a good time? If anyone back there who's in the shadows is falling asleep and someone's next to them, wake them up now, okay? So, for our next storyteller, many of you will not actually need me to introduce her because you know her very well already. You've most likely read one of her many books, Anita Diamant, including, of course, her bestseller, The Red Tent. Now, Anita says you might see her in one of Brookline's many coffee shops. The very cliche, these are her words, the very cliche of a writer. Please welcome her to the stage.
Wow, right? Four of the most beautiful words you can say to a writer is, "I loved your book." I've had the pleasure of hearing that a lot. I've written 12 books, but I know that 9 out of 10 of those people are talking about The Red Tent. And I'm happy about that, and I'm proud about that. We usually have a little conversation. They'll tell me where they got the book. Did someone give it to them? Did they give it to somebody else? Was it in part of their book group? And that's very nice. And very often I am asked, so where did you get the idea? And I say, oh, that's a long story. Let me leave it at that. Tonight I'm going to tell you the story, or what I remember of the story. Here's where it starts in my memory. It's 1990. It's 1 minute after midnight. It's June 27th. I had just turned 40 years old. I'm sitting on the porch of a beautiful cabin that my husband and I had rented for a week for vacation on Martha's Vineyard. It's beautiful. The stars are out. The air is warm. It's perfect. And I'm counting my blessings. My husband Jim is upstairs sleeping. Our 4-year-old daughter Amelia is upstairs sleeping. Pom the poodle is someplace sleeping. But I'm looking at the sky. And I am counting my blessings. And that includes for me the work that I'm doing. For somebody who grew up with parents for whom work was a paycheck, my job, my work is something that fills me with joy and excitement, and it challenges me all the time. And I am a journalist, and I have the perfect job, my perfect job, which is writing a weekly column for the Boston Sunday Globe magazine about just about anything I want. Some of it's funny, some of it's serious, a lot of it's personal, and I'm working with a wonderful editor. I get to write long feature stories, something that you don't get a chance to do too much anymore for the magazine, and also for other magazines. Also, I've had 2 books published. They're guidebooks to contemporary Jewish practice. I have a 3rd one in production. I couldn't ask for anything more, really. But I'm feeling restless, professionally restless. I've been doing what I've been doing for some time now, and I know how to write a column, and I know how to write a feature story. Not that that isn't difficult sometimes, but I know how to do that, and I'm feeling like I need a challenge in my writing life. And I am, for the first time in my life, toying with the idea of fiction. Now, I had never thought about it before, I think mostly because I didn't have a story. When you're a journalist, there's the story. You tell the story. You learn the story. You shape it. But it's not a story that I came up with. And I had never had a story burning in the, there was never a story in the drawer like some of my journalist friends had. And I had recently gotten an idea, sort of a biblical inspiration. I wasn't hearing voices or anything like that. But I had come across a story in the Bible that was very interesting to me, and that was the story of Rachel and Leah, who are married to Jacob. Jacob is one of the 3 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob falls in love with the younger daughter, and then he is forced to marry the older daughter, and he marries them both. They live together. Leah is the older, not the beautiful one. Rachel is the beautiful younger one. Rachel is barren. Leah has 6 children with him. So there's got to be a lot of tension, and that's where the energy is. That's where the conversation is usually about this relationship. But I thought there had to be more to it than that. That these women had to run a big household. There are ultimately 12, 13 children. So who's cooking dinner tomorrow? Who's driving the carpool? How do you negotiate life in this complicated family? So I thought about this idea, and I mentioned it to some friends, and they thought it was a weird setting. I actually got suggestions from 2 people that it should be about a Mormon marriage with multiple wives, and I knew I wasn't going to do that. For one thing, I didn't want any trouble with the Mormons. And also, I would have more freedom if I was imagining life, thousands of years ago. And I kind of had permission from my tradition to take liberties with this story. There's a kind of commentary called Midrash, which is not about laws and rules and regulations. It's about examining the text and finding stories within it. One definition of Midrash is the stories between the letters, between the words. One famous Midrash, my favorite, is the one about God coming down from heaven to the Garden of Eden in order to braid Eve's hair before her wedding to Adam. It's not in the Bible. It's just, again, what were these rabbis smoking? I mean, that was a mild one. There are some really wild ones. So, but that's part of Jewish tradition, and so playing around with biblical texts, it was okay for me. So I started playing around with this. I started imagining the relationships between Rachel and Leah. I started thinking about personalities, how they would speak to each other, the language, but I didn't have a story. I mean, it was interesting, but I didn't have a story. I was stuck. And I kept reading. I kept reading till I got to Genesis 34, which has a subtitle, which is The Rape of Dinah. The story briefly, as it's told, the family of Jacob is now encamped. They were never settled. They were moving campsite kind of, and they were living outside of the city of Shechem, and one day Dinah goes out from her family home to the city, and she encounters the prince, who's also named Shechem, and they meet each other. We assume, are intimate, because the next day the prince goes to her father and asks for her hand in marriage. Her brothers are outraged and furious because in that universe, no self-respecting, respectable woman would have sexual relations with a man outside of marriage, which was an agreement between the men of two different households. So for them, she had been raped, and she had to be avenged. She had to be avenged. So the prince is trying to talk to Jacob, the father, and saying, I want to marry your daughter, and what are the terms? What terms do I have to come up with for you? The brothers come up with the terms, which are horrific. They demand something of the prince and all of the men of the city that put them at great risk, and then there's a massacre. It's a horrible story. It's one that gets skipped over in religious school. It's terrifying, and I've talked to a lot of people since then, after they read my book, and said, I didn't know that was there. And they went to Cheder, they went to the religious school. They thought they had read the whole Torah, at least the first 5 books of the Bible. Horrible story. And in that story, Dinah doesn't say anything. As is typical in biblical stories, women are often silent, so we don't know what happened from her point of view. And after this story is told, she disappears from the text. She's gone. And I thought that silence was an open door for me, a door that was opened up by Virginia Woolf in her essay, A Room of One's Own, many, many years ago, which changed my life and I think the life of a lot of women writers and readers. So I thought, I'm going to give her a voice. I'm going to let her tell her own story, and I'm going to give her a second act. She's not going to disappear. She's going to go to Egypt. And in Egypt, she's going to be a stranger, and she's going to be alone and lonely, and if you want to know the rest, you have to read the book. So I had a plot. Now I had a plot, and I had a big challenge. And I started working on it, and I worked on it pretty regularly, but I often had to stop because I had articles to write for which I was getting paid. And nobody was paying me for this. This was my knitting project. I do not knit. I don't do anything handicrafty. It's like I write. So I worked on it. I put it aside. I worked on it some more. I put it aside. And at some point, I put it on the back burner, and the heat went off, and I left it for a while. It was very frustrating in a lot of ways. And then Angels in America opened on Broadway. Stay with me. It was again like a call from beyond. I had to go to New York to see it. I read all the reviews, I read everything I could about it, and I had to see the original production. I wasn't going to wait until it came to Boston. I had to see the original staging, the original cast. And for the first time in my life, I spent real money on theater tickets. I bought center orchestra seats for Jim and for me. Angels in America is a 2-part play, so that was 2 plays. So I got a hotel room for a night, and we went to New York, and we saw Angels in America, and boy, it did not disappoint. It was spectacular. Seeing it for the first time with that cast, it was just mind-blowing. It was beautiful. It was terribly sad. It tells a story from the early days of the AIDS epidemic. And it was also often surreal. in many different ways, both visually and in the storytelling. And there's one scene in part 2 where the ghost of Ethel Rosenberg visits the bedside of a dying Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was a slimy Republican lawyer who helped Joseph McCarthy run the House Un-American Activities Committee, which was a Red Scare which ruined people's lives. He also was a lawyer for a very young Donald Trump for a while. And he was also instrumental in getting Ethel and Julius Rosenbaum convicted of spying for the Soviet Union and sending them to the electric chair. So here's Roy Cohn in his deathbed, dying of AIDS, but he hasn't told anyone that. He's been closeted his whole life, so he's told everyone he's dying of liver cancer, and Ethel Rosenberg shows up. They hate each other. Oh, boy, they hate each other. And they hate each other on stage, and they spar with each other. They know each other very well. It's a great scene. And then before Ethel leaves, she recites Kaddish for Roy Cohn. Kaddish is a prayer that's said at funerals, at gravesides, and in memory of the dead. It's a way of honoring the dead. She says the whole thing in Hebrew without any translation or explanation, and you could have heard a pin drop. And then she disappears. And then the play continues and goes on. One of many breathtaking moments. That one really stayed with me. In the car on the way home, we were in Connecticut someplace, I said to Jim, if Tony Kushner can do all of the Kaddish on stage without any explanation or any translation, then I can write a novel about a minor character that no one's ever heard of from the Bible. So it gave me permission in a weird way. That doesn't make sense, I know. But it was a very important turning point for me. And I hope you enjoyed that little story. So I went back and I started working again really in earnest. I had a wonderful writing group supporting me and giving me really good feedback, tough love, lots of love. At one point, I sent some of the early pages to my father. My father was my biggest fan. My father gave me my love of language and literature and words. I mean, he would hold up words like they were gems and play with them and laugh at them. And he read everything I wrote. I sent him all my articles, and he always called me and told me how much he liked them in detail. He saved all the clippings in a box. So I sent him some early pages of what I was calling the Book of Dinah at that point. And he kind of apologetically said he didn't understand what was going on here. And I was disappointed, of course, but I also knew that it was a big left turn, and okay, and I decided I wouldn't send him pages. I would send him the whole book when I was done and maybe had a shot at getting it published. My father died 2 years before the book was published, and a little over 3 years before it became a bestseller. Whew, he would have been over the moon. He would have been over the moon. When he died, I became a mourner, and in Jewish tradition, that's a particular status that gives you a roadway, actually a very specific map through the valley of the shadow of death. And it's very wise, it's very practical, and I recommend it highly. Anyway, the first week you sit Shiva, that Shiva means 7, and you just face the fact that you just lost someone you loved. You don't run away from it. It hurts a lot. My rabbi once told me every day you sit Shiva saves you a year of therapy later on in your life. I think that was probably true. And I sat, and I was amazed at who came to visit, and the people who came to visit, even people I didn't know well, and I realized, oh, she lost her father last year. She understands what this is about. It's a club you join when you lose somebody like that. So that's the first week, and then in the first month, you return to life to some extent, and a lot of people wear a ribbon with a tear in it to let people know that you're not quite back, that you're tender, and you should be careful around me. You also say Kaddish, the prayer that you heard me talk about earlier, Ethel Rosenberg, and you say it in community. You stand up before everyone else and you say Kaddish in memory of the person that you're mourning. And there are other people standing up too, and there's a kind of community and a kind of a kind of consolation in that as well. I'm sorry, I get emotional at this point. I miss my father a lot. Anyway, I wrote a book so-called Saying Kaddish the year after my father died. I spent like a second year of mourning, and I learned a lot about the traditions and the histories, and I felt like it was a second year of being in mourning. But that fact informed the writing of that book in a way profoundly. I think it's the best writing I've ever done because it was so close to the bone, it was so close to the experience. But I'm not here to talk about, I wasn't invited here to talk about saying Kaddish, I'm invited to talk about The Red Tent. The Red Tent was published 27 years ago. It's been translated into more than 25 languages. I still get email from people all over the world telling me, I loved your book, and other things, and then telling me where they found it and how it came to them. I get the occasional email from somebody who's outraged at the liberties I took with Holy Scripture, but that's okay, it's fine. And as I said, when people come up to me and say, I loved your book, 9 out of 10 of them are talking about The Red Tent, and I am eternally grateful. The 10th person is usually not smiling. They're often talking in a lowered tone of voice. I really loved your book. And I look at them and say, did you lose somebody recently? And they nod. And I ask about them, and they tell me a few things about the person they've lost. And I tell them about my dad. And I ask if we can hug. No one has ever said no. And that is a blessing that needs no translation. Thank you.
Well, our next storyteller, Rick Fredkin. He's a Brookline dad and a tech savant who's passionate about the Brookline Public Library, woo! And yes, cheer on the library, you can cheer on it. And helping provide STEM access to marginalized groups. The unlikely place you might find Rick at the bar at one of the best restaurants in town, I would say, Mahaniom Restaurant, hanging out with a bartender named Earth. Rick, please come to this stage and welcome.
Thank you. So, I had an amazing childhood. I was born and raised in Brookline with my father, Ed, who is a computer scientist, physicist, and business person, and my mother, Joyce, who worked with him. And part of their business, it took them all over the world, and I was lucky enough to get to travel with them, and we had countless adventures. But I had a problem. Whenever I'd come back to Brookline, I would be in school. And I was a failing student. I was a failing student from the first grade. And I didn't participate. I wouldn't turn in assignments. Even if I got a math test, I would get all the answers right, but since I didn't show the work, I'd still get a 0. And I even failed PE, amazingly enough. The instructor informed me that I had to wear shorts. And I don't know why, I don't remember, but for whatever reason, I was not wearing shorts at the time. And I wouldn't do it, and so I failed PE as well. And as you can imagine, this caused a lot of consternation in our house. My teachers, my parents, everyone regarded me as a smart kid, and the question was, why couldn't I perform in school? I remember my father told me, he said, Rick, school is your one job, and you're failing at it. You know, I felt terrible, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it was very hard on me, and but I do have to say, at home, I was in a house that was filled with love. But also, I was raised to be very independent. As you can already maybe guess, it was an unusual household. And my parents traveled a lot. And lots of times, I was by myself. So to give an example of this, when I was 13, I come home, and there's a note on the kitchen counter. And it says, "Gone to Florida, be back in 2 weeks." A little surprising, and it's more shocking to others than it was to me. But, even at that time, I could cook, I could clean, I could get myself wherever I needed to go. And so, I felt fine with that. At the same times, at other times, it was a little less easy. When I was 5, I couldn't do everything then. So anyway, my mother's leaving on a business trip, and my father's returning from a business trip. And there's supposed to be a small amount of time in between those two events. So my mother left on the business trip, but my father's plane was delayed coming back from the business trip. And so I'm 5, and I realized that there's no one in the house. And I look, and I can't find anybody, and it's concerning. Time goes on, concern turns into worry. So eventually, I move a chair so I can stand on and get to the telephone. And I call the operator. And, I'm beginning a nice conversation about my predicament. And luckily, my father comes in at that time, and, sort of life went on, but very, very independent. So, I'm back, back to my school career. I'm, sort of tragically failing forward through the grades. And when I turned 13, I tell my father my intention is to leave school permanently. And he says, "Rick, you can't leave school till you're 16. It's illegal. You'd be a truant." Interesting. I think in some way he probably knew I sort of thought challenge accepted. Now, what would give me such a crazy idea that this was even possible? Well, the summer beforehand, I was 12, and I had a job at a software company in Cambridge, and I was a programmer. Full time. My official title was Demo Boy. I had a card to that effect, and I worked all summer and made a demo in their software that first introduced networking into their product. So after that summer, and I have to say, I loved it. And I would wake up early. My alarm clock was set for 5:30 in the morning. It was fantastic. And I had a taste of life. So now I'm faced with the prospect of 9th grade at Brookline High. And I was desperate. I was desperate not to do it. And I had done some research. And what I was looking for was not unlike the situation that a child actor might have. And so I went to, the school administrators and proposed a deal. And the deal was that I would work full time. I would, I would pass in my timesheets, and I would do something else to fulfill educational requirements. And so I took night classes at Newberry College, and it took about 2 months, but I got the deal. And very strangely, I don't remember having any pushback from the school. There was no pushback from my parents, but that was it. I was signed out of school, and it turned out that was the last year of traditional schooling that I ever had. Now, you might ask, hearing this, so I'm 13, And I went back to the same software company to work. You might ask about child labor laws. Yep, this was a thing. But in our American system, I found out that a corporation is actually a person. And even as a minor, I can be every officer of the corporation. The corporation can have a bank account, and I can sign on the corporation's behalf. So when I was 13, I started Codex Computer Corporation, and that was the start of my professional career. So soon after, I have real jobs. I'm 14, 15, responsible for the hardware on Nike's first public email servers. And, I'm taking a business trip. I'm flying to Orlando. I'm teaching a corporate class on Java programming to Pfizer middle management at the Disney Institute. And I get there, I set up. It's, a classroom. Everyone's 2 to 3 times my age. Some of them happen to be MIT graduates, which I thought was cool that I get to teach them. And, I went around, led them through the exercises, fixed their problems, just generally helped them. And they thought it was fantastic. I mean, this was a Doogie Howser type thing for them. And, I was having the time of my life as well. And I have to say, this actually paid pretty well, too. So the Pfizer job, I was paid $10,000 for the weekend. And it was a great perk. I was very excited. I got a free week at Disney World. And so, things just went from there. I've continued my career, worked for some of the largest companies in Massachusetts and, internationally. And of course, what's life without irony? Because now I have a company and we get technology into, of all places, education. So, at this point, I'm still in Brookline right here, and I have kids of my own, and they're 14 and 12. In fact, my son's about to go into Brookline High. And, I can't, with my perspective now, I can't imagine him taking the same path. And in fact, when people ask me about it, I don't recommend it. And to really put it plainly, I would say, don't try this at home. Now, at the same time, I have a real appreciation and gratitude for my parents. They weren't easy parents, and I certainly wasn't an easy child. But at the same time, they had the trust and always supported me while I was finding this path. And the thing is that, this is, I think, what anyone wants for their children, is for them to be happy and find their place and purpose in this world. So anyway, I thank my parents for giving me this path. I wouldn't trade it for the world, and I can't wait to see what my kids do. Thank you.
That was amazing. Sorry, I'm just like, I could barely tie my shoes when I was 14. No one is more intimately familiar with the story of Brookline.News than Julie Rafferty. She is one of the founding members, co-chair of the steering committee, and president of the board of directors. She's a former journalist who now consults to nonprofit organizations. And I'd just like to welcome Julie to the stage.
Wow. I am just flabbergasted by the stories of these people here. I can't believe that you are so amazing and that we're just hearing a few of the amazing stories that people in Brookline have to say. And I just want to thank you so much for your courage and your bravery for getting up here tonight and telling your story. I also want to thank all the sponsors and all the organizers of this event. It takes a village, as has been mentioned a couple of times. And I just want to thank you all for doing that. I want to thank all of you, many of you who have been our supporters since day one. And I also want to thank the people who make sure that Brookline.News comes out every week and sometimes more often, the volunteers and the staff. I think we've done a lot in the last year, and while I don't want to say congratulations to us, congratulations to all of you. Before we get to our last storyteller, I do want to take a minute to correct a misconception. We did not start Brookline.News because we missed the Brookline tab. I don't know that the tab ever actually came to our house, to be honest with you, because we live in South Brookline, which I know is another country, but okay. We started Brookline.News because we missed facts. And facts, we believe, are vital to a functioning democracy. My first job out of journalism school was covering local government in a real backwater in upstate New York. One time, the members of one of the boards that I was covering decided they needed to talk about a particularly sensitive topic. And so, being largely an all-male board, they adjourned to the men's room. Bathroom politics were a lot different back then. I did not feel comfortable following them in, but journalism was different too. I wasn't the only reporter there covering this meeting. There was also a man from a competing organization there, and I turned to him and say, "Get in the bathroom, find out what they're talking about." Which, you know, people who know me know that I'm kind of bossy. And so he did what I said. And he went in, and within a couple of minutes, the board all kind of sheepishly came out and talked about whatever it was they were talking about in person in front of everybody who was there. Fast forward to today. 2,900 newspapers, large and mostly smaller, have closed in the last 10 to 15 years. That's 1/4 of all newspapers. Thanks to the internet, social media, greed, and a whole bunch of other factors, it isn't profitable anymore to run a newspaper. As a result, there's no one in many communities knocking on that door, bathroom or otherwise, to find out what's going on. Research shows the results. In areas with no local news outlets, fewer people are voting, fewer people are running for office, governments are less accountable and are actually more expensive to run. And as a nation, we are more polarized because we don't know our neighbors and the only news we hear is national news. And so that's why a small group of us got together in July of 2022 on Irene Segi's back porch to create Brookline.News. We raised enough money, thanks to many of you here in this audience tonight, to hire an editor, Sam Mintz, to hire and pay freelancers, and recently to even hire a second reporter and a full-time business person. We did it because we believe a functional democracy requires local governments to be held transparent and accountable. Our stories on the schools, the select board, the town budget, filing a Freedom of Information Act request to open previously secret town meeting listserv conversations. Those are all ways we're doing that. We also believe democracy requires a sense of community. That's why we have a calendar section on Brookline.News. That's why we organize an event like this tonight.
Democracy also needs a strong journalism profession to fuel it. With so many small and mid-sized newspapers closing, we risk losing an entire generation of young journalists who have no place to train to learn the profession. But at Brookline.News, we are bucking that trend. We're working with people from BU and students from BU and Emerson and Boston College and Brandeis. We have students who are now writing for us and in some cases getting their first bylines. And we're even working with BHS and their news outlet, The Cypress, giving these very young journalists greater exposure for their work. The Fourth Estate, journalism, is the only non-governmental body mentioned in the Constitution. It turns out the Founding Fathers knew a thing or two. But as Walter Robinson, formerly of the Globe Spotlight team, wrote recently, much of the country has been fixated on whether we can trust the news we read and watch. What is more worrisome is that much of what we should see in the news is not being covered at all. Most everywhere, the watchdog has stopped barking, but the watchdog is awakening, perhaps nowhere more than here in Massachusetts. And that's why we started Brookline.News. But quality journalism isn't free, and democracy isn't free either. And so they've asked me to come up to make the pitch. You knew it was coming. I hope you will take a minute, if you haven't already, and scan that QR code that I think is in your program that will take you to a donate page. That's all I have to ask for you tonight. I'm going to shut up now, and we're going to turn over the stage back to Meghna to introduce our last storyteller.
Okay, we're gonna close with a powerhouse. Because Brookline is home to at least one Moth Grand Slam champion. And she's obviously with us tonight. Ann Guo creates delightful experiences for Brookline, including hosting Scotch and Stories Night for her neighbors. And the unexpected place where you're likely to find Ann? At the bottom of Summit Hill, about to hoof it up. Please welcome Ann to the stage.
All right, so this was 10 years ago. It's January 2014. I'm driving toward a hotel in Cambridge with a sense of dread in my stomach, because I can't believe that I, a 38-year-old professional Asian mother, I'm about to become a party crasher. And not just any party, it's the Goldberg Bar Mitzvah. Now, this all started back in 2008 when my son was born, a time that should have been the happiest in my life. I was diagnosed with postpartum depression. All of a sudden, at work, around the water cooler, I no longer knew what to talk about. But I find myself smiling a lot, partly to hide how I was truly feeling inside, but partly because I once read somewhere that the act of smiling will trigger happy chemicals to release in your brain, and I can verify from personal experience that it's a load of crap. Now, the depression lasts around 2 years or so, but it's not like after 2 years of darkness, I wake up one morning and win the lottery, and all the happiness and joy from winning the lottery fills up that emotional deficit I've been carrying for the last 2 years. Instead, I'm dragging around this deficit, this heavy burden, everywhere I go, and life felt somewhat flat. And I couldn't help but wonder, is this my new normal? Will I ever be as happy as I once was? Now, by the time my son turned 5, I said, all right, enough is enough. I'm gonna have to do something about this. In fact, I'm gonna print my own winning lottery ticket, something that will bring me so much joy and happiness, it'll fill up that emotional deficit I've been carrying. But what could that thing be, though? I sat down at my kitchen table and made a list of all the most joyful moments in my life just to see if there's a pattern. Lo and behold, many of the entries involved going on silly adventures. So I said, all right, if that's what it takes to get back to tip-top shape, so be it. I declare the year 2014 to be the year of adventures, where once a month I'll make time to go on an adventure. And to help me come up with ideas and to help hold me accountable, I send out a mass email to family and friends, making them a deal they can't resist. I said, look, you now have an opportunity to dare me to do whatever it is you want. Provided that you donate money to my favorite charity. If I hit my donation target, I will do your dare, no matter what it is. And oh boy, did the dare start flowing in. I'm to walk 100 miles from Boston to Northampton without bringing any money or food. I'm to build a boat and float in it on the Charles River. And I'm to speak only Shakespearean English for an entire week. Now, my husband Dan, who's Jewish, challenged me to crash a bar mitzvah. A coming-of-age celebration for a 13-year-old boy. So as I'm pulling onto Memorial Drive, just minutes away from the hotel, I'm starting to experience some serious anxiety. Because if people ask me, who should I say I am? I probably am blend in with the Goldbergs. Now, I have to be related through either marriage or adoption. Well, my plan is just go in there, quickly chit-chat with a few people, maybe get on the dance floor for a song or two, and if there's a limbo contest, there's usually a limbo contest, I might even participate. What I won't do, however, is eat or drink anything, because that would be stealing. On top of it all, I even brought a birthday present with me. It's just a small card game, but sort of my way to proactively atone for the transgression I'm about to commit. So with the plan all worked out, I step into the hotel. I figured I'll first do a walk-by of the room just to assess the situation. After a long, winding hallway, I come upon a set of large double doors. As I walk past, time slows down. I see 5 round tables. The one at 10 o'clock is populated with teen boys. I figure that's where my target is sitting. The room is brightly lit. Everyone is just sitting there, quietly eating their dinners. Holy crap, there's no music, no dancing, no limbo contest, totally unlike the bar mitzvahs I've attended in the past, legally. There's no way I can pull this off, because if I walk in the door, all eyes will be on me, and everyone will hear what I have to say, and I'll be instantly exposed. Abort mission, abort mission. But then I remembered Dan telling me, look, all you have to do to prove that you crashed a bar mitzvah is take a picture with the birthday boy. I think I may have an idea. So I walk through the set of large double doors directly toward the head table. Hi, how's everyone doing tonight? How's the food? I'm Anne from the catering department. A woman stands up, we shake hands and chit-chat a little. Oh, by the way, I got a birthday present here. Who's the birthday boy? My plan is to go over there to that table full of teen boys, have one of his friends take a picture of 2 of us, and then I'm out of here. Oh, the birthday girl, you mean? She's right here. What? This is a bar mitzvah? The girl equivalent of a bar mitzvah. I got the gender wrong. What else did I mess up? I'm just standing here all flustered. While I hand over the gift, the girl opens it up, thanks me politely, and puts it away. And I miss my photo opportunity. I don't know what to do or what to say. Well, Normally, during these celebrations, there's music and dance. I have no idea where I'm trying to go with this, just trying to buy myself some time. Oh, this is just a dinner for all of our out-of-town guests. The actual party is tomorrow. What? I wish I came tomorrow instead. Now you tell me? Okay, think, Anne. Well, where I'm from, if you take a picture with someone who's about to celebrate their birthday, it brings you good luck. I can't believe I just said that. I cringe so hard. It doesn't even make any sense. I'm just gonna get out here now, pay everyone back for their charity donations out of my own pocket. But then I hear her say, "Oh, sure, of course." And I hand over my cell phone for the photo. Now, on the ride home, I'm flooded with a sense of euphoria because it's like I just survived a near-death experience. And by December of 2014, I've walked across Massachusetts, I've spoken Shakespeare in English, and I've built that boat out of 2 pieces of plywood, and my maiden voyage only lasted 10 minutes because it started leaking. So after a whole year of monthly shenanigans, my emotional bank is magically full again, and I can't believe that I'm happier than I've ever been. Thank you.
I think everyone should do what Anne did and make 2024 the year of monthly adventures. I love that so much. So listen, first of all, before we wrap up tonight, I just want you to give an enormous round of applause to our storytellers again, Miranda, Pablo, Michael, Anita, Rick, and Anne. Thank you so much. You have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for coming. You can give yourselves a hand. And I personally want to thank Iris Adler, who is one of my great mentors, for inviting me to be part of this special evening. Thanks to everyone on the steering committee and everyone who's making Brookline.News possible. Your support tonight by coming is meaningful. Your continued support for local journalism for my kind of town is going to be invaluable, not just for you and your neighbors, but for every future Brookliner as well. So thank you very much for coming tonight, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening.